Henry Winston Churchill said, "You ask what is our aim in this war? I can answer in one word: victory. Victory at all costs, victory in spite of all terror, victory however long and hard the road may be, for without victory there is no survival." And each one of you here, I think you had that one thought in mind. You fought the war, you longed for the war to be over. The one thing we all wanted was victory and peace. When you entered the service, you all had to go through some sort of training. Let's talk about this boot training. Shall we start with the Navy first?
Good idea.
What was it like?
Well, my particular case, we didn't get a great deal of boot training because I went into the Navy right here in Glenview at the air station. We had boot training, but I'm sure it wasn't as rigorous as they might have had at Great Lakes. I think they needed to train personnel for, we were being trained for aviation service personnel. We did have some boot training and guard duty and that kind of thing, but that was about the extent of it. Further on, and before we went overseas, we had some additional training in California, Shoemaker, for overseas duty, but that's about the extent of it.
And how about you?
Well, when I was at boot training, we went to Great Lakes. And it's kind of a funny story in that there's all this folderol about people enlisting and going in and doing things. Well, in my case, my mother drove me up to the train in Park Ridge. I rode downtown, got on the North Shore, and rode up to Great Lakes, and that was how I...
All by yourself?
All by myself. And we walked in the door, and they took away everything I had, all my clothes, all my personal things. And
all your hair.
And shaved the hair. And then they walked us down into an area that they issued us new clothing, and you're in the Navy. It took about 3 hours to do the whole thing. And from that time on, Great Lakes became home for about, I think, 8 weeks, during which I got all the training you didn't get. I got a lot of muscle training, a lot of drilling, there was a lot more walking and military stuff than I thought Navy people needed, but that's...
We were flying those little yellow airplanes flying over Great Lakes.
You were having fun. But I was getting disciplined and teaching to obey orders, I guess, is what they were doing with me.
And how about the Army? You know,
We started out, at Fayetteville, North Carolina in basic training. And we arrived, a lot of people were going in the Army at that time, and so the first duty was to clean the field where we parade. And the grass had grown up about this tall, so we all got down on our hands and knees, and we were lawnmowers all day long. But then after that, we went through the regular basic training where you learned where your left foot was and your right foot. We had some people who really didn't know.
Dyslexic.
And we had one fellow, I remember, first day was down there, they pulled 7 teeth, so he was not feeling very well that day. But overall, it was a lot of fun, but you didn't get weekends off for the first 2-3 weeks. You had KP duty once in a while, and that you didn't like. But you met a lot of nice people and a lot of fun. And looking back.
Well, Irving Berlin said, "This is the Army, Mr. Jones. No private rooms or telephones." What did he mean by that?
Well, it was a big barracks that probably were from World War I, and they hadn't been open for years. So you were in one big room, and there were probably, I'm going to guess, 25 people in that room. And you had a squad leader who led your squad, and then you had, of course, a sergeant, and then officers. And you had to make your bed every day and make it tight because you had inspection every morning. Then you went out and had exercises, and then you went to breakfast and so on. It was pretty basic living.
Ours was a little different. Our barracks was similar to what you've seen in many bases if you've driven by them in recent times. They're big buildings, and we were probably 150 fellows all in one long room, And I remember that it had a stanchion across the middle, a board across the middle, on which we hung our sea bags, which was the only thing we could put our stuff in because there were no lockers.
We had foot lockers.
You had lockers, and we had this bag. And the reason we had the bag was we were going to have to carry it. So everything was in there, all your clothing, everything that you used. And in the top, I had a little thing called a ditty bag. Remember that?
Yeah.
And in the ditty bag was where your shaving gear was. So later on, it proved to be very valuable because I had to live out of that for the 3 years I was in the service. And you learn in the middle, because my duty called for me to serve 24 hours a day, 8 hours on, 8 hours off. I would go in there in the middle of the night, I could find anything in that ditty bag.
How about you? Was this the same thing? Did you live out of whatever you had?
Well, we had a foot locker, and
okay.
everything had to be placed just right because you had inspection every morning. They'd come in and they might tell you to open your foot locker, and if it wasn't right, it was very wrong, and you would get demerits or couldn't get leave on the weekend. But I remember we had, when you would go out and be inspected, and you had your rifle with you, and we were all issued new M1 rifles. And so we had to clean them up, and they had been greased up, so we cleaned them all up. But in the plate of the butt of the rifle, there was you opened it and you kept things in there. I didn't know that, so I didn't clean it. Well, then we had inspection. Fortunately, the lieutenant examined the rifle next to me and put his finger down that hole there. And if he'd done mine, I would have come up with a bunch of grease and oil, and I would probably still be in the
Army.
That's right.
Well, what were you trained for in the Army? You became an aviation mechanic.
Aviation machinist, mate.
Excuse me?
Aviation machinist, mate.
Okay, very good. And what were you trained for?
Well, I was trained in Memphis to be an aviation radio gunner. The intention was that we would be assigned to the TBF, which is a torpedo bomber, and that plane had a position at the lower bottom, the rear bottom, where the radioman was, and it was kind of an unnecessary thing because you had to keep radio silence all the time you were in the air, but you listened a lot. And they taught us in Memphis the Morse code, and we were drilled on typing so that we could transfer the information that we had to with a typewriter. And we learned to use the what we called a bug. It was a key to send Morse code, none of which we were ever going to use in an airplane, but turned out to be very useful to me because the Navy discovered that I was wearing glasses, which I'd had on since I was 15, and said, "You can't fly, you have astigmatism." So after training me, I was assigned to a base station, and that's where I stayed for the rest of the war.
Well, we all had different things happen to us in, the Navy and the Army. We won't forget that. Winston Churchill said that in war, we have resolution. In defeat, we have defiance. In victory, we have magnanimity. And in peace, goodwill. We're going to take a look at peace when we come back. Okay, thank you.